Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AYON workflow presentation. If you've been to any of my previous presentations at FMX, you know this will be very unorganized, and I'll speak too fast, so bear with me. I would love to get a feel for the room. How many of you know AYON? Just a few. How many of you use AYON? And how many of you would say you actually have a solid production workflow and nothing ever goes wrong? Very good, one hand. I'd love to speak to you after the presentation and actually catch up. At the very end of the presentation, please do stick around briefly because we'll hand out some cool t-shirts. And to add a disclaimer, taking photos during the presentation is completely allowed. I don't care, do whatever you want. Before we get started, let's keep the FMX tradition that each presentation should definitely go on way too long about the person. Who am I? So for those who don't know me, hi, I'm Roy, head of pipeline. More exact, I'm the head of pipeline at Ynput, as these guys here. And I'm actually the best head of pipeline at Ynput. Scrap that, I'm just the best head of pipeline in general, or simply the best head. No, wait, that sounds weird. In my spare time, I'm also a volunteer, or whatever you call someone who makes random, unsolicited code contributions to open source software and GitHub. But of that, I'm definitely the best random code contributor, zero bugs, always unit tests, readable code. It's the best code, period. And for those who do know me, please keep your mouth shut. So, workflow. Let me break down what I'll be showing. I'm announcing a new product called AYON Workflow. It's a sneak peek on the bottom, it's nodes. We'll first tackle what it is and why you'd want it. Then I'll go and show some prepared examples and showing how you can use, or if you want to abuse it. After that, I'll break down some more technical details on what makes AYON Workflow special compared to some other node execution graphs, and why that difference makes it perfect for pipeline workflow automations. Let's explain first what the workflow add-in is really for. The best way to describe it is to automate the steps between the steps. That is not to say that if you want, there's no place for running arbitrary scripts every now and time when there's a gap in the pipeline, but it really shines when you actually can connect it and automate it, because that means you'll definitely be going places, like this guy. So what kind of steps am I referring to? What are we automating? It's small things like updating the shot status if a task completes, or manually running a script to post-process some data, or maybe preparing some files for an internal review or collecting them for a daily client delivery. But it's also much bigger things, like my Maya publish should trigger some nuke slap comp, which should trigger some preview edits and so forth. Or your task is done, but requires some complex handover to other departments or vendors, which is often done manually. Or when reviews are done, automate that statuses get applied accordingly. It's from small to big, it's anything in between. It's the manual things you do now which end up taking a lot of your time, and in some cases even worse if you're like me, you need to remember yourself to do them. So that when you're starting your work, everyone else knows, and that others can start their next task perhaps, or to ensure you did indeed, before the beers happen in the piano bar at FMX, did actually run the important thing you needed to run. Or where? But usually these manual steps mean your production gets filled with hacks or workarounds, like someone needs to trigger this, becomes the pipeline being blocked or waiting on someone else. Or you'll do it manually for now, maybe a few days, which means you're going to do it forever. And that manual quick script is always you running it, so no one else knows how it works, or even knows what it is, or that it exists. It results in accumulated friction, which especially adds up in bigger productions. So there's no flow. AYON has been around, it already covers the pipeline, but the AYON workflow add-on fills those often not so creatively fun gaps in between, essentially streamlining the pipeline. It's a node-based way to build workflows. Like we all know, teams can kind of see the logic. Instead of embedding important details inside custom scripts that only some understand, it also makes for a better tool to automate. Instead of manual steps and stacked workarounds, the AYON workflow add-on can automate these things. But more importantly, I think it's tightly integrated within the AYON workflow, so that it can trigger the graphs on the right moments. It can trigger on AYON events when you publish something, or a status changes, or a notification goes out. It's tightly integrated into your production pipeline. Yes, of course, you can run them manually, but it really shines if you make these customizable steps part of your production, where you build the setup and it's directly driven by the pipeline, so that it runs when needed. In that sense, it really extends the AYON pipeline you might already be using. In this case, a few of you. So it's a node graph. It should be playing a video, yeah. It's simple, clear. Most of us, it's something we're all familiar with. Nothing special about node graphs these days. We can slice connections, shake nodes to disconnect, all the things you're used to. Copy, paste, whatever you want. When executing, we're able to debug the input and output values at each port of the node, because of course there's a state at each point. It has built-in mechanism to roll back on errors, and of course you can bring your own nodes from your own add-ons. The workflows can be set up to trigger on ION events, like I explained before, so that they automatically run on those dire moments you were usually running them manually, like on a status change, a finish publish, or if you really like, generate, for example, a production recap every weekend for the coming week. The execution engine allows to dispatch things within a single graph into separate chunks, meaning you can dispatch like parts of the graph to the farm, but you can even chunk a single node to be distributed across tasks in a single job. So that if you have one render node, it can just turn into multiple frames on the job in deadline, for example, or any farm you're using. That's not code that is in the node itself. It's the execution engine knows how to do that if you just specify the code in a way where it can run per frame. So that in that way, you can actually use the farm to your best advantage. So let's go through some examples. I'll go from super basic videos, so there's a lot of manual process of what the actions should be automating, just so everyone kind of sees what it does and how it works. Let's take an example where we auto-generate some previous assets for some new assets that came in from the producers. How does the graph kind of works? We first need to get the context, what project and asset are we processing. Then we're going to use some AI to take it through the AI model of our choice and generate a model from it, because we just have the asset description. Then we're going to generate a turntable using USD. And in the end, we're going to encode and upload a reviewable to ION. So in this case, we're going to see that we're going to generate a new asset in ION in a very slow manual process, because you've all learned that I'm very slow. Look at that. Jeep, desert Jeep. And then we're going to add a brief description of what we want to generate. So again, this is a producer. Producers are very slow. That's why I intentionally made it this slow. We save it, and then we're just going to run the action. But in this case, let's just take the folder path manually and copy that into our workflows add-on. In this case, I have the node set up, the node graph set up, and I'm just going to say this is the project, here's the folder path, and the rest is already set up, where we're just going to take it through AI and going to run it. As it's processing, you'll see the graph running. At the very bottom, we have some text to image and image text to 3D nodes that are now running in the background. And then in the end, we'll output a 3D object. And we'll be taking that into a turntable USD at the very top in a bit. So apparently, generating 3D models is very slow. Seems like a producer could do this job. I thought I edited this, but.
Might be faster with a modeler.
You think? It's actually being sent now somewhere to mull it for me. Thank you. I really hope I swap the videos now. Because otherwise we're going to see 3 times the same video, and now I need to explain everything it should be doing. So yeah, you kind of see the graph. It will end up publishing things. Let me see if I can actually skip to the end of the video here. Apparently not. Let's see if the next video is actually the correct one. Yes, I'm pretty sure. So in this case, we're going to do the same thing, but distribute it to the farm. So there's a few ways we can do this. We can do this with the API, but we can also prepare the graph to already go through, for example, deadline. So we have dispatchers that go through different dispatchers, like deadline farm or royal render. And you can essentially generate like backdrops that will act as like this chunk will go together as one job on the farm. And you can essentially say what the job name is, what the pools are, what the limits are. So in this case, we have set up 3 jobs for deadline. And as we're going to run that in the end, we're just going to change the asset description for a bit. The Jeep you just saw was from the previous generation. But yeah, who has the time to wait on that? But now this one, I think, is actually cut down. So we'll see the now pink Jeep at the very end. In this case, it's running on the farm, but you can see in the web view that even that is able to track the background process on the farm and can see the status is complete as it goes. So we can kind of keep track of what's going on. Because all those states are stored on disk, we're able to access it and see, hey, what's going on there. So in this case, it generated a turntable, it's encoding the video, and at the very end, it will go through ION to publish it. There we go. So that kind of covers this. Very nice Jeep, auto-generated. These videos were kindly recorded by my coworker, Robin, and apparently he needs to remind himself he's professional, just so you know. We can do the same and actually run it as an action from the AYON web frontend. This is actually the same video again. Did I do this correct? No, did I skip it? No, there you go. Duplicate slide. So in this case, we can also expose it as an action. We can save the graphs to JSON because they're essentially just serializable as JSON. And then we can set the AYON settings to essentially say, hey, I want to have this action in AYON. Just run these graphs whenever someone clicks it. So the AYON frontend allows to have like web actions, which are actions you can run from the web interface, like launching your applications, or even running tasks on your local launcher. But in this case, it's just executing it on the workflow add-on, and that will submit it to the farm. So what will happen now is that as soon as we save that, we'll have a task here that I can just go to any asset. Hey, please generate me a new previous version of this model so that we, again, have an updated version of it. Again, not automated, but this kind of shows how the things work. We can wait on this to complete, but I don't think we need to. Is it actually skipping it? Or? Oh, there we go. So what else can we do? We can also add turntable previews to models that are already on our AYON web frontend, but we don't have any previews for. So if you make a graph like that, what do we need to do? We need to get the models. We need to know which model version we want to generate it for. Again, we're going to generate turntables using USD. And in the end, all we're going to do is encode and upload reviewables. You can kind of see the pattern here that these are all relatively simple steps. So in this case, we have a similar graph. And again, I think I did swap these here. We have the action already set up. And then if we go just to the project, hey, I noticed that these kind of products, they're lacking a preview. I know there are models. Let me just generate them, and we can send it to the farm. So in this case, we'll send all those to the farm. And in this case, it's Robin on his MacBook, so he has to wait instead of distributing it across the farm. But we'll see that as that processes and continues, the previews will end up on the web frontend. There we go. Again, these are just LMX or USD files that already exist. And all we're doing is making automated turntables and uploading the reviewables. And again, this is the graph. I forget that I put on a title at the very bottom, and on click, it hides the title. So I need to click twice. See? I said it was unorganized at the very beginning. So another thing we can do is generate slab comps. Again, very trivial graph. In essence, we need to get the render and the relevant plate for that shot. We're going to build the AYON workflow template in Nuke, which is just part of the Nuke rendered node. And we're going to render it out. Then we're going to encode and upload the reviewable to AYON and add it to the review dailies, just so we have access to it. So in this case, this is the amazing background we'll be using for this preview. And look at this amazing art by Robin. This is snow we'll be putting on the backplate. Just as a very simple example, we can just trigger the action here. Again, we're all doing this manually to show how it works. It will generate both of these deadline jobs where we have the render and the publish. And in the end, we'll have, I mean, it's better than my program's art, this amazing piece of art. So yeah, that kind of covers it. Boils down to this graph. Again, the backdrops, they define the chunking in this case. On the left side, we have the context of what we're loading in. We're going to gather the relevant light render sequences and the plates, and then go through the Nuke render, encode it, make a AYON representation, and publish a slab comp for it, and add it to the review list. So we can build quick automations with this, like on task statuses changes. We can change the shot status, and we can configure on the server to trigger these events automatically, which is not something I've shown, but I think, did I show that? No. But essentially, you can configure it that those actions essentially trigger on events that happen on the server, so they can be triggered from server side to run from the server. If you really want to offload that, you can also make like a local processor for AYON that will essentially subscribe to these events and run it completely on your own to take that load off the server. But in this case, all it's really doing is distributing it to somewhere else. So it's just taking, hey, here's a request, post it somewhere else. Or we can generate a graph that runs a Maya export. That one ends up running a Nuke export, and that one runs a Houdini post process. And again, all of these jobs that it's doing in between could be spawning off events to do other stuff. They can kind of like live together on that way, but you can also make one graph that does everything. You don't need to make the nuke node chunk across 2 different frames if you don't need to, if you know it's faster on 1 frame. But it's all configurable in the graphs, and the dispatcher knows what to do. Or we can kind of combine them, like we detect when a new render comes in, which is the event, then automatically trigger the slab comp. Again, these are all simple steps. And someone told me this presentation might be too long, but I'm definitely going very quick. Can everyone still follow along? Very good. Okay. Take a breather, take some water. Okay. Yeah, it's the beers from last night. Okay, and of course there are way more possibilities, and I could show them all, but I thought I wouldn't have the time. Maybe I should have added them. And I see everyone in awe. So, whoa, Flow. Milan, I know you're here. We should really consider the workflow add-on name, because this, whoa, Flow, see this? I'm on fire. Now let's talk a bit about the tech. It runs on TaskFlow in the background. So it's built on OpenStack's TaskFlow, and we have a good reason for that. It's open source like AYON. But OpenStack handles mission-critical infrastructure for AT&T, China Mobile, Verizon, Volkswagen, stuff like that. Actually, if you've got a smartphone in your hand, it's probably you're talking with some OpenStack software. TaskFlow is one of the root libraries for a lot of that. It works for telecom, so probably it might just do, it's just barely good enough for us. At its core, TaskFlow was built to be resilient, because again, it needs to run everywhere. It's not just a Python process that gets lost on the execution once the execution stops, we can track the state and see what's going on. In production, it usually even manages critical DevOps workflows like cloud volume creation, where hardware might fail, or Kubernetes cluster deployments, stuff like that. If supporting these critical cases will make it good enough for them, it's probably good enough for us. And for us, the persistent states that we can kind of store and get back to later is very important, so we can actually help debugging and see what's going on, even when it ran on the farm. Did I just break it by moving the laptop? I think I did. Did it work? Very good. Sorry about that. Let me see. And then, of course, we have interchangeable execution engines. In practice, we're not doing much with that, but TaskFlow essentially separates the code on how it executes from how the graphs are built and stuff like that. We currently have our own execution system that also knows about the dispatchers, but technically, TaskFlow can handle all of that as well, which could even optimize it even further. So what we've done is to implement the VFX specificities and a nice editor on top of this. Again, the UI itself is a node graph. It's not special nowadays. We added an editor API plus UI editing, so it feels like working with a pipeline DCC. We have standard objects for a lot of the representations, especially within AYON, like the media, the context, folders, products, just to make it easy to make them in your graph and push them through. We have a uniform DCC implementation, so we'll add up like render nodes for Nuke, Houdini, the whole batch we kind of support. I've noticed that some community members were working on our After Effects and Photoshop integrations to find a way to run it through our integrations and still make that run headless on the farm and run arbitrary scripts. People do weird shit. But if you could do that, you can actually trigger it from the workflow add-on as well. But all the production file paths are automatically managed cross-platform within the system. So we have like rootless paths inside AYON, which are essentially just a path where some parts of the path are swapped with what AYON knows to be the roots on different platforms, and the workflow add-on can swap these out automatically. So that for running what may feel like complex automations to set up, you don't need to be a wizard or a toy astronaut to use it. It's Buzz Lightyear. The graphs are serialized to be pure JSON data, easily copy-pastable in plain text, and of course they are great for published products as well, if you want to version track the workflows themselves, because they can also be their own products. So Robin made this very nice graph for me. I hope I can make any sense of it. But the editor and the node are for the user to define what needs to be done. Like any node graph, they used to be relatively tiny black box nodes that should take some data and put some data out, so they are very easy to generate, or AI code if you want. But in our case, we're also offering some higher level things because we feel that that is easier to use if you're making large graphs, like you would usually like make a subnet and make an HDA in Houdini if you're going to do very complex things. You can do the same thing here. And then distribute it across your farm. What's important here as well is that as it runs, we can leverage the AYON server and the AYON launcher to make the dispatcher figure out the configuration of your deadline farm from the server, and voila. It can do the rootless path conversion because AYON knows about all the roots, and it kind of goes from there. See, I was going a bit too quick. So we're already at the what's next. The things we want to investigate a bit more, currently all the events on when it triggers, they're all configured in the settings, and settings can grow complex if you want to have very specific triggers and very dedicated filtering on when it needs to run exactly. Of course, you can do that filtering inside the graph yourself, but we're investigating ways on how to define those triggers. And for those who are familiar with N8N, it also has like these triggers. You define when it's going to trigger, and you have some filter nodes, and that can kind of define the graph on when it should probably run or not. But to really get this off the ground, we just need more examples. Graphs and nodes are relatively easy to make, but you really want to see and learn where you can best use them in production. And like Oprah says, it's there for everyone, because every production kind of has these gaps. I think it's worth checking it out. But there's something else special we can do with this. The workflow graphs can act as tools with structured data requirements, like generating some output data, and we know what input needs to go in. And it just happens to be that MCP eats tools for breakfast. So MCP is the model context protocol, but essentially what LLMs use to learn how to use something, like how to read and run graphs, so it can actually run it as tools. There are some interesting things we can do with that. And I would be a bad head of pipeline if we wouldn't, which we all know. I'm not. Meet my AYON assistant. I call her Noya. See, Milan, I told you, I'm on fire. And this is, again, Noya will happily eat your GPU to answer you any questions you have about your project. You can ask it about the statuses of your project, but it can also run way more complex tasks like, hey, Noya, can you find me all models in the demo project that have no uploaded preview video yet and generate them for me? In this case, I'm asking my computer to figure out how to do this using the workflow graph that I allowed it to use. It can't touch anything else. The AI can go and say, hey, I decided to format your C drive because that's the easiest way to get rid of all the models that don't have a preview. You can save these actions to AYON so they become reproducible graphs. It's not like the next time you're going to run this, it's going to ask LLM again. You're not going to eat your GPU again, or you're going to spend your cloud tokens again, depending on the model you choose. But it will essentially take the graph and see, okay, what are the dynamic inputs that are relevant to this? You can save those to the web front end. And our web actions on the front end have a system where they can define their own forms. So those dynamic inputs could essentially be like a form input, and then you can essentially just have a producer say, hey, we need a way to generate the review dailies. I want it to behave like this. That will generate an action, and they will become available on the web front end. And I think I speedrun through this. That's it. That's all I wanted to show right now. Is the workflows add-on that we're announcing now. Any questions? You need to think a bit about your own render farm to run the workflows? That's what you're asking? Yeah. OK, so the dispatcher essentially just triggers it, sends it somewhere to run it, and executes it. We've run it now only on local hardware, so it distributes to Roy Render among our clients as well, and on Deadline also among our clients, even on multi-OS platforms. I haven't tried actually running it, pushing it, for example, to Deadline Cloud or AWS, where it does part of the execution, because it might need some of the dependencies to do the execution. But those dependencies themselves are not necessarily the complex thing, because when it runs, it doesn't need AYON, even though some of the nodes themselves might run a sub-process of AYON. So then it will still need access to your server. But if you have a graph that essentially does not need to touch itself AYON in any way, it can run anywhere, I would say.
The question was if you have your own kind of render farm, because I assume that you will have more possibilities if it's as works as you like, and it would be like a single server that you can start on different machines.
So you're asking whether this could act as a render farm on its own? Yeah. I guess technically it could. We don't have like a trigger currently that does like polling event and like see what jobs came in. but you would essentially be building what deadline was. Like here's just stuff coming in on a folder somewhere where it's triggering the process. At least that's how I understood that deadline, the older deadline kind of worked. Yeah, I'm not seeing it now, but I'd be happy to chat with you about how that could work and how that would, what the interest is there to build that. But I can see with deadline 10 going end of life, there's very good reasons to look in other options. Anyone else?
Can you talk a bit about more adding your own nodes? Like what's the process?
Yeah. So the question is how to add your own nodes and how that works. So currently they're all just Python code. Essentially, the way it's set up now is very bare bones. So you just tell the plugin system, here's a function you need to run with some arguments. It will output some data, which usually are type hinted, so to make the system better. And there's a JSON file, or there's like a dictionary, which would end up like JSON data, that defines what types of parameters there are. The front end, in this case, in this demo that I showed, had like setups where if you have a type that is any, it can essentially, like on the front end, show an attribute for any of the known types that are known by the graphs at this point in time. So it knows all the data classes that you've defined, and it kind of pick from there. But that's kind of how it works. It's not like you're designing your own nodes through some editor. It's just Python.
And they're like Python files on disk, basically, and somehow get read in by the server.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, again, the execution is on the farm or local, and those need access to the Python scripts. So the Python scripts currently do not touch the server at all. Any other questions? Somewhere in the back?
You mentioned the example of automatically rendering turntables. How would that work under the hood? Does it create a new project file and render it out from that? Or?
Yeah, so in these examples, so the question is, Liz, how does the generating of the turntables and the rendering of that works? That's your question, right? So in this case, what we're doing is we're just using the USD API to essentially just populate a load of data. So whatever USD can read, we can read. And with the Adobe plugins, you can technically read FBX and stuff like that as well. But in this case, we focused on Alembics and USD. We would essentially auto-view the camera so that it fits, make a turntable of that. And that means that also there's an API to just define like what's the frame range you want to generate, because it's all generated through the API. And then we're just rendering it through USD with our viewer. Yeah, back there.
Just a structural question. The vanilla nodes, do they live in the add-on repositories or do they live in their own?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I think the question is whether the vanilla nodes currently live in this add-on or where they live. So the concept is that you can bring your own nodes. Technically, you can put them anywhere and you can tell the system like, hey, there's nodes there. But the real design is that we have AYON add-ons that can kind of like, you can upload to the server, and those will automatically be distributed to all the users or all clients that are connecting to AYON. And you would put them in the relevant repository of which add-on is related to. So you'd potentially put in like the nuke render, you would put that into the AYON nuke repository and kind of do like that. As we're prototyping now, it's just much easier to have like one repository to, if you need to refactor things, you can easily do so. Oops, I think Milan needs to log in actually. So the idea is that essentially each add-on can serve its own add-ons by adding them and just expose like on the add-on itself a method that says, oh wow, finger touch, you're magic, and expose like here in this path in this add-on you can find all the graphs.
That's what you're doing, so the Maya vanilla.
In this case, all the prototypes we've done here are still all living in the workflow add-on, but I do know of clients that have their own add-on, and we're already using them from a different path. Yeah. It's also important to know that as you're building these graphs, you can set their name, and you can set their description. And you think, well, description is not, like, I can kind of see what it's at because they're relatively simple graphs. But those descriptions become very relevant for the MCP. Because it's going to read that. It's like, if I'm going to use this graph, I can see what the input and output is, but you can kind of define like, what it's used for. So like the more descriptive you get with the description, the better the MCP can get, and the AI. Yep.
How do you troubleshoot graphs if you're building something new and you need to figure out if something in the middle breaks? Like, do you go through log files or?
Yeah. So the viewer kind of like, if you execute it locally, that's usually what I do because then I don't need to wait on the farm to pick up the job and stuff like that. But everything is tracked in states, which is what TaskFlow kind of does. Usually I think it does it in memory or some other weird way, but we have a way where we store it on disk, which is a custom backend for TaskFlow. And we're using that as a persistent storage for what the state was at each point in time. And then we can essentially just read that and say, hey, okay, this was the inputs and outputs at that point in time. And what you can do on the front end, where it runs in memory, you can essentially go and select a node and say, okay, these were the outputs at that point. You see that it filled. You can see the logs of that particular node, but you can also like deselect everything and it will show the logs of the whole graph. Yeah. But yeah, I think the majority of the issues you're facing during development when making your own nodes, it's usually an error you made in the Python code, or if you're daring enough, the AI did in your code. I think it doesn't, for example, say, okay, this input port is the wrong port, because it doesn't know that is wrong, because you cannot connect the wrong data. So whenever it runs, it will always be running with the valid data type that it needed. So the error is always going to be somewhere inside the node itself. And that could be as simple as I'm using a published node, but I entered no project name. Then the log of that node would say there's no project name. It does, I think, put the last error as like the highest, like this is what likely happened, but we've all seen with, for example, deadline, that if it just says, hey, here's a crash, that the useful logs are usually above it. So you would usually still traverse the logs. Yeah, I did play with the idea of making like a log filter UI that was a bit more complex, but I think I was talking to your coworker yesterday that that was a very good idea, but in the end, it was like I needed a PhD to use the filtering. But there's definitely things we can do improve logging, but at the same time, there are so many tools that are already parsing massive amounts of log data that are kind of like built for that. So it makes sense to put it to some other tools, do global logging with Loki, take it to Grafana, and go there. But then we're talking about big studios. If you're a small studio, you'll probably be building your own small nodes and just checking what's there.
Do you have plans to build a library of smaller, more granular nodes and I guess like an official MCP along with that?
No, you're not going to get my stuff. No, I think, yeah, definitely. I think at this point, we're mostly checking like what is possible and what could we do with it. Currently, all the nodes we've built, or most of the nodes we've built are very focused on, I'm going to execute some tasks, but if you want the AI to really make use of it, or have the output data be relevant on its own instead of being relevant just to execute another node, it means we'll need way more nodes that just say, okay, if I filter this, what comes out? If I do this, so we'll end up with more granular nodes. We did decide early on that we didn't want to make like a visual programming where essentially I'm coding the thing. So we focused a lot on having higher level nodes to break down the bigger chunks. But yeah, I think at some point, if you really want to go very versatile in the graph itself, you either generate the nodes, or write the scripts, or you're going to have a lower level thing. I must admit, I found the importance here is that the execution engine and how it's integrated is way more important than the nodes you have, just due to the recent development in AI. Like it's easy, like tell me, do a nuke render. It can do that. It might not work off the bat, but you can tell it twice, you did this wrong, and it will correct it. And you almost have functional code. So I think the making of the nodes themselves, especially because they can be relatively small blocks, I don't think the issue will be there. I think we had like a prototype of this front end. Sorry about that, Milan. Yeah. I see. I was too quick in the presentation. Now I need to answer all these questions. So I did a quick prototype. I think early on. What did I want to say? What was the question?
It was about like an official MCP along with official nodes.
Yeah, I lost it. Sorry about that. We might catch up later after. Yep.
Do you have some sort of like environment handling? I could imagine like if you run those complex workflows, you have a nuke starting up in a local machine, you might, I don't know, on the license server or something, FMX or whatever. Is that like
yeah, very good. So the question is, do we have some environment handling? So in this case, like I said, some of the nodes that we have now, they run through AYON. And if we run through AYON, we already have environments completely managed by AYON. So all those things like license servers or even custom plugins you're using in Nuke, those are already managed by AYON, which kind of like goes back to the earlier question, which I misinterpreted, whether if you were to run this on Deadline Cloud, yes, we would need to have Deadline Cloud integration, which is in the works. That would essentially push all the needed stuff to run the Nuke application with all the context you have. And once that's there, it would essentially go through AYON and say, hey, run it wherever you want, and AYON will resolve the rest. Yeah. Anyone else? Joe.
I'd like to understand how the workflows are stored and who can use them. Like, are they saved on the whole AYON instance, or is it like a per project sort of thing? And can you kind of say, right, I only want producers to be able to run workflows 1 and 2, and certain types of artists to run other workflows? Is there that sort of permission system?
So in this case, with the MCP and the AI, you would just tell it like you can just touch these ones because you don't want to touch like everything you have everywhere. Because if you just happen to make one that does formats to your C drive, you don't want it to accidentally run that. But I think what we've been doing now is mostly just saving the graphs and storing them somewhere to use them and load them manually and test it. We haven't worked as much on the side of where we just like here's a market of plugins you can download now because we don't think the priority is there at the moment. Especially with AI, because you can just generate a lot of it. I think once everything is validated that the way we've designed it is useful, because I'd rather prototype that a few times, reiterate, and maybe here and there break some backward compatibility while we still can, to validate that we're doing the right thing. And then after we validate, okay, this kind of works, we can do all the stuff we need, then I think it's much better to, okay, now we need to elaborate into here's packages that everyone can rely upon. We're not going to destroy them, that in a year you can't run your graphs anymore. And I think it will be like that for some time. So that will definitely be offering examples like, hey, here's some basic nodes, here's some graphs. I think what we had now in the team is that in the repository, we just had like a list of JSON files, which are very small, of like, here's some graphs that we just tested with. Some of them were essentially useless, like, here's an image sequence on disk, encoded. Felt useless to me, but it's very useful for the AI. Because if you describe the graph of what it does, you can now tell it, hey, encode some images, which is kind of what I just showed you.
I would just add to the permission system, because web actions are using the AYON's built-in permission system, so you have web actions running for users, managers, and admin.
Yeah, so yeah.
If I was going to say exactly that, just because of the mic on the recording later on, so people can hear it. Yes, so AYON, if you expose it as AYON action, that has a full permission system. You can say which ones are available to which cohorts of the studio teams, people, permissions, and so on. So it kind of depends very much how you run it. If it's an automated workflow, so it's listening to events, then this is a non-problem because it's autonomously running based on a type of thing that happens in the system. The permission is pretty much irrelevant. If you make it actionable, the actions themselves can be completely controlled by the permissions, yes.
I should have used this just now when I forgot the answer. But yeah, I think that kind of covers it. I think we do have some time left because I was way too quick, I think.
I think you've done it in record time.
I hope it was interesting, albeit short. Yeah, you had another question there?
Yeah, just one. Currently, AYON has a simple build system for creating workflows. Is it also meant to replace that? Because you can do these workflows and you can post-process them as well?
Yeah, so the question is where, like, AYON offers like workflow templates that are being built automatically already. Like, could the workflows replace that? I think in a way it could, but we're not very focused on that. We're not focused on building, like, again, visual programming that happens to be running inside Nuke, where we do custom stuff with the node graphs within Nuke. We're not as focused as much on that. We're just saying, okay, you can run some things in Nuke. You can run a script in Nuke, and you can do that. Because usually those are smaller things you're doing. And you can kind of stack them together. So no, I don't think so. But what we have done in the cases where we were running this was that if you have the Nuke render node, if, for example, it just has a checkbox that says, would you want to trigger the build work file? So that if it happens to open a scene that has placeholder data, it would essentially evaluate and build the template. So if you just run Nuke render, for example, which is a node, on a template file, it would essentially build it in the current context and kind of go from there. So you can use the template build system that AYON has, but it's not as if the node graph itself would, like, you're going to build your own new work file builder. Technically possible, not something we're prioritizing at the moment.
If I may, it's the way to think about it is, and this is where it's currently used in production, like what we're showing here, we're going to be releasing. So right now, this is in private beta to AYON Studio customers. They can tell us and we'll give it to them. We'll help them kind of get it up and running and set it up. It's going to be a general release soon for, again, AYON Studio customers. But where this is run currently in production, it actually uses the templates a lot. So this is running a very heavy production at the moment. One of the clients, for example, where essentially artists trigger, I think it goes from layout or from animation, I believe, in Blender. They just publish from there, but what comes the other end is a fully comped, groom applied, shaded, lit, and comped pre-render, like pre-comp of that shot. So instead of reviewing animation on Animation Playblast, it goes through 3 departments in between, and what you get at the end of the day is the full render. But that means that each step in between has a template in whatever Houdini, or it has a template on Nuke, or has a template in between that actually dictates what happens inside of that particular DCC. So this is supposed to be complementary to those systems. We really, really don't want to build an N8N with tiny microscopic things that just happen to, you might as well code it then, exactly as Roy was saying.
Question about distribution. If you have a workflow graph that does a couple of things that don't rely on each other, can those distribute as different jobs on the farm, and then maybe you have a node that waits for everything to finish before doing a final step? Would that kind of thing be possible?
I think it's already there. Yeah, I think if you make 3 dispatchers above each other, you have 1 dispatcher at the end, and it just happens to be the connections kind of define what is the input for it. As far as I know, it should already be setting up the dependencies correctly. But I must admit, I haven't tried recently.
It is a native feature of Taskflow.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of picking a platform that is, we didn't make that up, that is used for far heavier workflows than what we imagined doing here. So a lot of this logic is already there. It is very possible that we hit bits in Taskflow that might need to be kind of slightly reintegrated, of course, but this should be there natively.
I mean, we can all get a beer now. It's so fast.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you very much, Roy. As I was saying, this will be available to AYON Studio customers. We're going to be releasing it more widely to AYON Studio customers at the AYON Summit, which is happening at the end of May. If anyone lives within vicinity, meaning if you're at least in Europe, consider joining us. We wanted to put a QR code there with the registration for the event, which we didn't, but come talk to us. And it happens at Prague. It's a 2-day event. First day is workshops. Well, we'll go in detail through how to use these systems. Geek out around the table. Second day is a conference. Clients will be giving talks. We will be talking about the roadmap going ahead. We get some good food. We get some good drinks. So that's the moment where we're aiming at releasing this to a slightly more wider set of customers. And there's going to be a lot of work ahead of us for the rest of the year on this and for the rest of the times, most probably, to be completely honest. So thank you very much. If you want, come grab t-shirts, come talk to us. Wear them tomorrow. Grab a t-shirt and wear it tomorrow. Let's get some color into this conference. Everyone's in all black t-shirts and stuff. No, let's do some color. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.